They thought my baby's first cry would embarrass me. They were wrong. It echoed through the dining room like thunder in a church, sharp, unapologetic, pure. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I looked up from my plate, adjusted his blanket, and held my gaze steady. Across the table, Vanessa smirked, and Carter chuckled into his wine. That was the moment I knew this wasn't dinner. This was war, with linen napkins and fake smiles. I'd been invited like a charity case. Come, bring the baby. We'd love to see him, Vanessa had written, lacing every word with curated sweetness. I hesitated, but part of me hoped maybe, just maybe, it was genuine. Maybe they'd softened. Maybe motherhood had taught me to be softer, too. But softness doesn't survive in rooms like theirs. Their house smelled like rosemary and competition. Every dish perfectly placed, every wine label hand-selected. I walked in wearing the only dress that fit postpartum. They walked in wearing judgment. It clung to me harder than the baby carrier. They didn't say it aloud, but their eyes, their pauses, their half-laughs? That was the real menu. The first jab was quiet. Wow, still breastfeeding? Must be exhausting. I smiled. It's sacred. Carter raised his brows, clearly unimpressed. Vanessa poured me water like I was fragile glass. Well, I guess. We all mother differently. And there it was. The weapon wrapped in grace. The opening cut.my baby stirred in my arms, sensing the tension I'd tried to hide. His tiny fists curled against his chest, breath catching in that way newborns do right before they break into sound. I could have taken him to the guest room. But I didn't. I stayed. Because sometimes silence is complicity. And I had heard enough. He cried. One loud, honest cry. Vanessa flinched like it was offensive. Carter coughed, muttering, "Guess we're skipping dessert." Laughter followed. Shallow. Cruel. I looked down at my son, kissed his forehead, then reached into my purse. My fingers closed around the envelope. Smooth. Final. Waiting for its moment. I'd brought it as backup. Insurance against the storm I suspected might come. And now that it had, I wasn't scared. I was clear. They thought they could reduce me to the tired mom. But I wasn't tired. I was ready. I'd been carrying more than a baby for 9 months. I'd been carrying proof they weren't ready for, but they were about to see it, tonight. I carried him for 9 months like a promise I was going to keep. Every kick, every flutter in my belly, felt like a secret between us. I sang to him at night, read him poetry in the mornings, even when my back ached and my ankles swelled. He was my anchor in a world that constantly tried to knock me off balance. Especially when I told them I was keeping him. When I first told Carter and Vanessa I was pregnant, they didn't congratulate me. They blinked. Paused. Then Carter said, "Wow. That's sudden." Vanessa hugged me with stiff arms and whispered, "Brave choice." Like love required explanation. Like motherhood was a gamble I hadn't earned the right to take. Carter was my ex. A short chapter, years ago. A messy one. He married Vanessa not long after we ended, and I moved on. Or tried to. We were never friends, but we had mutual circles, mutual events, and the kind of mutual history that people love to dissect behind your back. So when they invited me, I knew it wasn't out of kindness. It was curiosity. Gossip dressed as hospitality. They didn't believe I could raise a child alone. Not really. They'd seen me in my worst years, before therapy, before healing, before I remembered my own worth. I used to cry over text messages. Now I cried over lullabies. There's a difference. But they still saw the old version of me. And they expected her to walk through that door. Sophia, my best friend, tried to warn me. "You don't owe them anything," she said. But I needed to go. Not to prove anything. But to show myself that I could stand in the same room, with my baby on my hip and my dignity intact. I didn't expect a fight. But I was ready if it came. I dressed in a navy blue wrap dress that still made me feel human. Slid on my grandmother's earrings. Packed a bottle, 2 diapers, a pacifier, and the envelope. The one Sophia helped me prepare. Just in case. "Keep it close," she said. "You'll know if you need it." Their house was a Pinterest dream, oversized wreaths, champagne flutes, candlelight glow. Vanessa met me at the door with her curated smile. "Look at you," she said, eyes flicking over my body like an inventory scan. "And the baby, so small." Carter stood behind her, smug and still. "Well, this is different," he said. Dinner was a slow burn. Conversations layered with suggestion. "So, are you working again? Do you get much sleep?" "He looks like he has a strong will, like someone else we know." I answered politely. Smiled when I had to. But inside, I was cataloging every word. Every cut disguised as conversation. They thought I wouldn't notice. That motherhood had made me too soft to fight. But I hadn't become weak. I'd become sharp. Being a mother doesn't take away your fire. It focuses it. It aims it. And tonight, they were standing right in its path. The moment I walked in, their glances slid past me like weightless blades. Carter's eyes lingered just a second too long on the curve of my postpartum body before shifting away. Vanessa's smile broke only when I adjusted the baby's blanket. It was subtle, but sharp. Their words were polite. But their eyes never hid the judgment that rattled my spine. Vanessa leaned in early on. "So, still taking clients?" she asked, her tone dipped in sweet concern. I said yes. She smiled like she didn't believe me. Carter added, "At least. She's trying. That's something." I sipped my water, steady, though my knuckles tightened around the glass. Every time my baby made a sound, a soft coo, a sleepy grunt, they looked at each other. I caught their glances. The briefest exchange of amusement. I imagined the conversations they'd have after I left. About how I couldn't control him. As if he was supposed to perform silence for their approval, they never used his name. Only the baby. It was intentional. Dehumanizing. A way to talk around him, not about him. Not as a person. Just an inconvenience. A prop in their perfectly curated evening. They stripped him of identity with every dismissive reference. At dessert, Carter said, "Hope you're getting support, postpartum can be intense." His tone sounded like care. But care doesn't come with smugness. I looked at Vanessa, who nodded too enthusiastically, like my exhaustion was proof of their superiority. I kept my face neutral. Inside, something cracked. Vanessa joked about how she lost her pregnancy weight in 4 weeks. But hey, I had help. Trainers, dietitians. "You're doing it all alone, huh?" I smiled. "And still standing." She blinked, then laughed like it was a joke. But it wasn't. It was a warning. They asked questions that weren't questions. "Is he sleeping through the night yet? You sure you want to keep breastfeeding?" Each one carefully worded to appear curious. But I knew better. They weren't curious. They were collecting proof I was overwhelmed. Sophia reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Her nails pressed softly into my palm like Morse code for "I see you." That tiny gesture recentered me. I took a breath, deep and slow, and reset my shoulders. I had backup. Maybe not from them, but from truth. Vanessa refilled my glass without asking. "Hydration's key," she said. I thanked her. Watched her eyes scan my body again. Not like a friend. Like a critic. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to shrink. I didn't. I adjusted the baby on my chest and stared straight through her smile. Carter turned the conversation to birth control. Lots of women these days. One and done. He laughed. Vanessa giggled. I didn't. The comment landed flat against my skin. They didn't see it, but my baby curled tighter against me. Like he could sense something unkind. I thought about all the nights I cried with him on my chest, whispering lullabies into the dark. Not because I was weak, but because I was trying. These two across from me never had to try. Their version of parenting lived in photo shoots and filters. Mine lived in late nights and unconditional love. Vanessa complimented my earrings, my grandmother's, old and chipped. "Very vintage," she said. I said nothing. Some things don't need defense. Especially not from people who think kindness is seasonal and motherhood is a costume you take off at the door. The conversation turned to my plans. Future goals. Carter asked what I was working on. I smiled. Staying alive, mostly. He laughed. I didn't. Because that answer was real. And if they couldn't see the power in that, then they didn't deserve more of me. They expected me to play grateful. Grateful for their table, their condescension, their permission to exist in their world for a night. But I wasn't grateful. I was observing, measuring, building my moment. Because while they used words to try to shrink me, I carried the one thing they couldn't prepare for, the truth. Tucked neatly in my purse. Inside the envelope that would rewrite everything. The laughter started when my baby dropped his pacifier. A quick shriek from him, just instinct, and I bent to pick it up. I was fast, but not fast enough to stop Carter from saying, "And just like that, the night's over." Vanessa laughed. A full laugh. Hands over mouth, like it was all too cute to be cruel. I sat back up, silent. That sound, her laugh, hit me in the stomach harder than any insult. Because it wasn't just about the baby. It was about me. About how easy they thought it was to reduce me. How quickly they turned my motherhood into entertainment. That was the moment I felt their knives under polite words. Vanessa leaned toward Sophia and whispered something. They both looked at me and smiled. Not warmly. Strategically. Like I was a game piece being moved into checkmate. My chest tightened. The baby's fingers gripped my necklace. I didn't move. I held him closer, because I wasn't just his mother, I was his shield. Carter poured another glass of wine and said, "Must be nice, having all that time off." I blinked. "Time off?" He nodded toward the baby. "You know. While the rest of us work." I laughed once, dry. Motherhood isn't a sabbatical, Carter. He raised a brow. Depends how you define work. I turned to Vanessa. Is that how you see it too? She didn't flinch. I think some women take to it better than others. The room got smaller. I felt heat rise up my neck, into my face. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't clumsy. It was calculated. Crafted. Served cold. My baby whimpered. I rocked him gently, shushing him against my collarbone. I felt the pressure of every gaze in the room. My instincts screamed to leave, to run, to protect. But I stayed. Not because I didn't feel the pain, but because I needed them to see what it looked like when a woman didn't flinch. Sophia finally spoke. Why don't we change the subject? But the damage had already been done. The humiliation sat heavy in my lap, visible, tangible, undeniable. I didn't cry. Not then. But inside, I folded in half. The ache of being dismissed in front of people who invited me burned deeper than I expected. They didn't care about the baby. Not really. He was a symbol. A scapegoat. A mirror of everything they thought I should have avoided. They saw him as a mistake I had to carry. They didn't see the miracle. The redemption. The life I'd chosen. They only saw disruption. Vanessa offered me dessert like it was an apology. Pecan tart, she smiled. I shook my head. My stomach had turned. It wasn't food I needed. It was air. Space. Dignity. But all of those were off the menu in that room. Because they'd already decided who I was, and that story didn't include survival. I stood, adjusted my wrap, and bounced my baby gently. The room quieted. Even their cruelty paused. My voice was calm. I think I'm ready for my turn now. Carter tilted his head. Turn for what? I reached into my purse. My fingers closed around the envelope like it had always been waiting. For this moment. Vanessa's smile faltered. Carter's glass hovered midair. I pulled it out slowly. Placed it gently on the table between the centerpiece and their untouched wine. You had your jokes, I said. Now let me show you what real power looks like. Neither of them reached for it. Not yet. Their confusion was brief, but sweet. Because confusion meant they weren't in control anymore. I was, and I wasn't finished. I walked into the hallway with my baby, heart pounding behind my ribs like it wanted to escape. I didn't cry, not yet, but my throat ached like I had swallowed fire. Inside the dining room, I could still hear their laughter. Muffled now. Like ghosts mocking from behind velvet curtains. I leaned against the wall, eyes closed, baby pressed to my chest. My skin felt hot. Like shame had settled just beneath the surface. Not because I was weak, but because I had let them do this to me. Because I had hoped. That's what hurt the most. I still wanted their acceptance, and that made me furious. This wasn't small talk. It was emotional landmines laid at my feet. And I'd stepped on all of them, smiling. Trying to be gracious. Trying to be what they could tolerate. But now I saw it. They weren't tolerating me. They were performing civility while sharpening their knives. My baby whimpered again. I kissed his head. My lips trembled against his scalp. He was the only thing that made sense. The only thing that hadn't betrayed me with false warmth. I whispered, I've got you. But what I meant was, you've got me, too. The hallway mirror caught my reflection. Red cheeks. Mascara smudged. Eyes wide, not with fear, but with clarity. That's the look women have right before the break, or the rise. I stared at myself until I could no longer tell the difference. I thought about walking out. About disappearing into the night with my baby bundled and that envelope still unopened. About protecting my peace. But then I remembered how Vanessa said brave choice like it was a diagnosis. How Carter compared motherhood to laziness. I wasn't walking away. I was walking through. I returned to the table with my chin high and my spine made of steel. Vanessa looked up like I'd interrupted something important. Carter chuckled. Back for round 2? My hands didn't shake. I sat down. Smoothed the envelope with my fingers. Actually, I never left the ring. Sophia looked at me like she was holding her breath. I nodded once. She knew. We'd prepared for this moment. She placed her hand gently on the table, silent support. And I remembered, I wasn't alone. I never had been. I exhaled through my nose. Calm. Controlled. What's inside this envelope, I said, is going to change the way you speak about me. About him. About everything. Vanessa tilted her head. Is it a birth certificate? She laughed. Or another surprise? I didn't flinch. Open it, I said. Unless you're afraid of what it proves. Carter grabbed it first. Tore it open like he thought it would be harmless. His eyes scanned the top page. The smirk vanished. He flipped to the next. Then the next. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Vanessa leaned over. Her face fell. What is this? She whispered. I answered, calm and deliberate. Legal documentation. Paternity tests. affidavits. And a restraining notice if Carter ever contacts me again. Vanessa's face drained of color. Carter's jaw clenched, but the damage was already done. They thought I wouldn't come prepared. They thought I'd just cry, but I had built this moment from their silence. Their cruelty. Their arrogance, and now they'd read their own downfall, line by line. I spent the next day gathering evidence, copies of medical records from the baby's pediatrician, paternity sworn affidavits, documented logs of Carter's messages after he hinted at doubt, and legal permissions from his mother confirming she never saw him hold the baby. I filed each paper carefully into crisp white folders. Every signature, every stamp, every date read like a declaration: I'm not fragile. I'm unequivocal. Sophia helped me sit at my dining room table under harsh daylight, arranging documents into piles, identity verification, defamation evidence, legal protections. We talked softly, but urgently, about rights, boundaries, and facts. We reviewed every word I'd said that night, matched against their insinuations. We placed quiet truth against polished dishonesty, side by side. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, the inferno behind polite table manners. I thought of how Carter's voice dripped out into the winter air. That memory fueled me. I realized I held the power they'd never imagine in my hands. A mother's truth, notarized, witnessed, undeniable. I called a trusted journalist friend. I didn't want a story yet, but I needed a timeline documented. I told him I had evidence of social humiliation and defamation under the guise of polite dining. He listened. Took notes. Promised discretion. Just hearing his voice, neutral, steady, felt like someone had turned the lights back on. Over the weekend, I drafted a formal letter to Carter and Vanessa. I cited state laws and potential consequences, included redacted excerpts of messages he'd sent doubting my baby's paternity, and attached scans of supporting documents. I closed the envelope with calm precision, the same envelope that had silenced them before. Then I walked into Carter's office, again, early, purposely. I left the folder at reception with a return receipt. No confrontation. No spectacle. It was simple. I wasn't here to claim sympathy. I was here to claim boundaries. And they would respect them, or we'd see what rights I had. As I turned to leave, I remembered the kitchen at their dinner table, the shadows, the insults veiled as conversation, the knives cloaked in linen. That memory sharpened my resolve. But the truth? It would be what broke them quietly, publicly, legally. That afternoon, I filed official complaints with the necessary boards: defamation, harassment, emotional distress. I printed confirmation receipts. I wasn't seeking punishment. I was demanding consequence. I wanted their choice: leave me be, or face the truth. That night, I sat in the nursery, folding baby clothes, lining them up by size. I felt tired, not fragile, like the next chapter was beginning. My son kicked gently in his muscle. I whispered, "Mommy's got this." And I knew I meant it. It wasn't just protection. It was purpose reclaimed. I reviewed the envelope one last time. It had transformed, from weapon they used, to shield I brandished. I folded it and placed it on the mantel, next to Daisy's handprint ornament. Symbols side by side now, truth and tenderness, strength and innocence coexisting. And they would never mock again. Monday morning, I posted a carefully worded statement on my social media. Not messy. Not angry. Just truth. I wrote about dignity, motherhood, and the difference between being invited and being tolerated. I didn't use names. I didn't have to. The people who needed to know already did. And the people who mattered? They understood. They mocked me. I handed them proof. That was the final line. It echoed louder than any argument ever could. Within hours, messages poured in. Women, mothers, strangers, some who knew Vanessa, many who didn't, all of them saying the same thing: "Thank you for saying it out loud." Carter's company account went silent. Vanessa's brand deals paused. A few influencer pages that used to tag her in motherhood humor quietly unfollowed. No takedowns. Just absence. Just silence. And silence, in their world, is the loudest kind of punishment. I got a text from an unknown number. "We didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at it. It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because the conversation was over. I'd closed it without their permission. And that was power. Sophia called me that afternoon. "They're spiraling," she said, almost gently. "You good?" I smiled. Baby sleeping on my chest. "I'm perfect." It wasn't pettiness. It was peace. I hadn't destroyed anyone. I'd simply held up a mirror, and they hated what they saw. Later that week, I sent Carter's legal team a final document, a cease and desist for any further comments made about me or my son. It was clean, professional, firm. Vanessa emailed to clarify things. I forwarded it to Sophia. Let her clarify with silence, I said. That's all I ever wanted. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recalibration, and that's what I got. I walked into my next photo shoot with my son strapped to my chest. Clients smiled, complimented him, asked about his name. Not one person doubted my professionalism. Not one questioned my choices. And for the first time, I saw myself not as someone defending motherhood, but as someone redefining it. The envelope now lives in a drawer, untouched. I don't need it anymore. Its job is done. It served its purpose, not as a weapon, but as a line in the sand. A line they'll never dare cross again. They called my strength dramatic. I called it proof. The next dinner I was invited to, I declined. Politely. Firmly. No excuses. Just a soft, we're spending the evening as a family. That word, family, tasted sweeter now. It wasn't borrowed. It wasn't performative. It was mine. Built. From pain. Solidified through fire. I started saying no more often. No to small talk that reeked of judgment. No to circles where I had to shrink. No to rooms where laughter was just another form of cruelty. I didn't need acceptance anymore. I needed alignment. And I was done begging for a seat at tables I'd outgrown. My son grew stronger every day. So did I. I watched him discover the world with wide eyes and open hands, and I realized I had given him more than life. I'd given him legacy. A mother who stood up. Who refused to be silenced. Who told the truth even when it made people uncomfortable. Vanessa stopped tagging me in anything. Carter stayed quiet, his name no longer rising in circles we both knew. The silence felt good. Heavy with understanding. There would be no reunion. No awkward apology. No forced forgiveness. Just consequence, unfolding quietly, over time. Sophia. And I celebrated with champagne in plastic cups while my baby slept in his crib. We toasted to truth, to survival, to clarity. They thought they were strong, she said. But they didn't know what a woman holding her child and her evidence could do. We laughed. This time, the kind of laugh that heals. That envelope still sits in my drawer. Not as a threat. As a reminder. That's sometimes the best way to fight. Back is not with fury, but with facts. Not with screams, but with stillness. That proof can silence louder than vengeance ever could. I framed a photo from that night, not of the dinner, but of the moment after. Me holding my son at the front door, his tiny hand gripping my finger. I look tired. But I also look unbreakable. I look like a woman who walked through fire and kept walking. They left dinner quiet. I left with my baby, and my dignity intact. No one has mocked me since, and if they ever try again, they'll be met with the same answer I gave that night, truth. In an envelope.